one
Sound.
rolling?
A cam rolling. B cam is rolling. Do the clapper.
Yes.
So what I'd like to talk to you about today is I'd like to start off by asking you, what was the first movie you remember as a child that kind of set you on a course for movies becoming such an integral part of your life?
That's, for me, a very easy question. I thought it was going to be a tough one. The Wizard of Oz, plain and simple.
As a blizzard.
I'd be gentle as a lizard.
I'd be clever as a gizzard.
If the wizard is a wizard who will serve
Then I'm sure to get a brain.
A heart.
a home.
The knave.
I mean, you know, when I was growing up in the 60s, you know, in the Midwest, I mean, it was like, it was de facto. Wizard of Oz was played every Halloween, you know, on the one of 3 TV channels that were broadcasting television. So that's the first actual real movie I ever remember seeing. And while I was too young back then to intellectually and consciously understand the implications of all of the psychic aspects of how the characters were all dimensions of Dorothy's, you know, inner life, because of it was so specific, it stuck with me. It just like was implanted like a meaningful dream. And so, yeah, I've spent all these decades reveling and rediscovering all the implications of The Wizard of Oz. The basic answer would be storytelling, the illustration of a great adventure, the desire to fulfill a dream, and the willingness to face the challenges in order to acquire that dream, the desire to leave home as soon as possible. That's it, right from the get. Being challenged by a caustic force in the childhood environment.
You can send me to bed without supper.
If you don't hand over that dog, I'll bring the damn soup that'll take your whole farm. There's a law protecting folks against dogs that bite.
And the desire to escape as far away and as fast and as soon as possible.
They'll be coming back for you in a minute. We've got to get away. We've got to run away.
That's it. The myth of run away from home. There must be a better place somewhere else. Piece of cake. Not as simple as it first appears, so we all find out.
Better get under cover, Sylvester. There's a storm blowing up, a whopper. To speak in the vernacular of the peasantry. Poor little kid, I hope she gets home all right.
But that's the entry point. That's the desire.
What is it about movies have made them such a strong anchor point for you in your life?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the satisfaction of simultaneous distraction and connection. I find it easy to get connected through a well-told story and a well-constructed film. And the distraction is going beyond present life, where all of the normal day-to-day struggles and strifes happen. And it's not just escape. It relates back to the, you know, the Dorothy thing about what was the first instance of relationship, like the desire to run away from home. So like it's a version of that, to be able to be engrossed and connected in a story that, when done well, actually implants a feeling of hope, that like I'm not trapped in one paradigm.
Where on the spectrum for you do movies lie between entertainment and meaningful engagement?
I think that depends on my mood. If I'm more in the mood for entertainment slash distraction, then I would access a different type of movie than if I was interested in intellectual stimulation and engagement and a learning process. So I absorb a very wide range of things, anything from frivolous romantic comedies to total heady documentary, scientific, psychological, whatever. And that's whatever I choose to look at any one time is based on the mood I'm in at the moment. And I could usually go almost any way, but
What for you makes a movie important and worth rewatching?
for me, the first thing that would make a movie important to me, I want to say the first thing is relatability. If there's something about the story and the characters that I have a direct empathetic relationship with, like if I have that kind of relatability to the story and what the characters in the film are doing, that's number one going to be the first thing that's going to keep me there and intrigue me. And those are the kinds of movies that I probably would be prone to watch over and over again. The other facet I can think of is films that this story maybe isn't as immediately relatable, but it is something that is a discovery, new territory, something intriguing, something about what it is those characters are going through in their story that I may not feel like is exactly me, that I'm projecting myself into, but that I am fascinated to know about what their experience is because it's an unknown experience to me.
What's the first director that really impressed upon you that he was an important one to bookmark and follow?
I would say it was Alfred Hitchcock.
Good evening. Perhaps I should explain this. My wife had these posters printed up as a joke. Of course, she doesn't really want me.
Because, given my age and him preceding me by 30 years, yeah, definitely, his movies, it was so different. Like to see something in like the late 60s that Hitchcock did was so different than what else was going on that really made an impact. I mean, seeing Psycho for the first time when I was, I don't know, I was maybe 10 years old.
She needs me. It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
Films like Psycho, Rope, North by Northwest, Marnie, all of those. He was definitely the first actual director that I was like, okay, this is a whole nother level of reality, and I want to know more.
What did the advent of television bring to your life growing up? What do you remember about its impact on you?
Something to do in the morning at 6:30 a.m. before going to grade school. And a few years later, when I was a young teenager, 12, 13, 14, staying up after midnight to watch Don Kirshner's rock concert. Two ends of the spectrum. Am I watching Gilligan's Island at 6 a.m. or am I watching Midnight Special at 1 a.m.?
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour.
That was my first television reality.
What was your first impactful show that you remember watching?
Kung Fu, 1970.
You are the new student. Come closer.
I was in 7th, 8th grade or something when that came out. And for me, from my point of view, everything else, it was like an evening television, just sucked out loud. And then all of a sudden that showed up, and it was just a window to an entirely different philosophical point of view about how to be in the world. And I related to the pastoral quality and the loner hermit seeker visionary quality, the moralistic do the right thing.
Time for you to leave. Remember always that a wise man walks with his head bowed, humble like the dust.
I mean, there's just so many things that were so different than everything else that was on television. It wasn't much long after that I would say that show was what inspired me to look further, to start finding books about like Zen and reading D.T. Suzuki when I was really young, because of that. It's like, wait, there's something more here.
I know Rod Serling's Twilight Zone has left a deep impression upon you. How did that come about, and what was it that impacted you about that show?
There is a 5th dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
It was different. I mean, yeah, I mean, even like, Night Gallery, Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, all of those TV episodics were fascinating. And I particularly, have an affinity for Rod Serling.
Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognize, is a map of the United States, and there's a little town there called Peaksville. On a given morning not too long ago, the rest of the world disappeared, and Peaksville was left all alone. Its inhabitants were never sure whether the world was destroyed and only Peaksville left untouched, or whether the village had somehow been taken away.
The things that he produced, the different writers that he brought in, the way that they created those vignettes. But that was different. Those were, brief, specific, 18, 22-minute vignettes of a bit of a story. So for me, that sets it apart from like the Kung Fu story, which is like this long arcing episodic where it's always the journey, of one's soul. And the episode after episode with Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, Hitchcock. Those are just like individual moments. But, the range of creativity, and as at that time there was things going on like Lost in Space. In the Addams Family. All of those kinds of things that were equally intriguing and informative.
All right, so to bring it full circle, when I think about how your lifelong love affair with movies began with The Wizard of Oz, do you feel for you that part of the meaning and value that movies have brought to your life has been a process of recalibrating your relationship to home?
Well, in the words of Martin Landau in the great film Ed Wood, home.
I have no home. Hunted, despised, living like an animal. The jungle is my home.
But I digress. That's somebody else's film, but I love it. Yeah, home, I have no home. Going back to the, that myth of the desire, the fascination with running away from home, the metaphor of the hot air balloon, a lighter than air escape vehicle to take us somewhere else. But how does all of that influence, reframe, or instruct the sense of home? Is home actually a mythological place? Is home a unicorn? Is home something that exists only inside, and it's just where you are at any given time, wherever you may be? If I had something to reflect on about the Oz story and Dorothy's journey, and that at the end, she ends up back at home in her bed, surrounded by all the people that love her, and she's comfort.
But anyway, Toto, we're home. Home. And this is my room. And you're all here. And I'm not going to leave here ever, ever again. Because I love you all. And, oh, Auntie Em, there's no place like home.
Her whole, there's no place like home, there's no place like home. For me, that it was kind of an unfortunate ending, because she just ends up right back where she began. So it's like, oh, well, she did all that, and then really, and now she's okay with just being there. And so I've grappled with that, because that hasn't been my experience. I've never experienced a place like that. And maybe that works for her, and maybe that works for some people, and maybe that's a part of the myth that I just don't understand. But I certainly do understand, for me, the role of Oz himself, Professor Marvel.
Until one day, while performing spectacular feats of stratospheric skill never before attempted by civilized man, an unfortunate phenomena occurred. The balloon failed to return to the fair.
It did?
Weren't you frightened?
Frightened? You are talking to a man who has laughed in the face of death, sneered at doom, and chuckled at catastrophe. I was petrified.
The wanderer, the seeker, the guy who got lost in his hot air balloon, or drag his wagon across the plains, or whatever it may be. For me, that movie could have ended with him just drifting off to the next unknown landing site.
Goodbye, folks!
That, to me, that rings more true. That there's always going to be another balloon ride. There's always going to be another wagon ride. There's always going to be another unknown destination adventure. And then you take it from there. So those are just, to me, the two paths
And for me, I'm still up in the air.